The snow fell in sheets that winter, soft enough to muffle boot steps but heavy enough to bend fences until they snapped. Leadville was half buried by January, the streets narrowed to channels between drifts. Lamps along Harrison Avenue burned pale halos through the white haze, casting light on men who looked twice their age by 30 and women who stared past their own reflections in the glass. It was on a night like this that the town first whispered about the McKenna sisters. Not in judgment, never that, but with a reverence usually reserved for saints. Their saloon was one of the few places in town where the lamps never sputtered, where the heat inside felt almost like memory. You walked past the swinging doors and were greeted not by sawdust floors and whiskey breath but by music, polished wood, and the smell of lemon polish and roast. To miners who had dug themselves raw, it was paradise. To young women arriving from the east, it was sanctuary. At least, that was the story told. The real story began in a cabin outside of town, with a fire that had burned too long and too hot. Marshal William Dugan stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to the frame, watching as smoke curled from the hearth. The floor was black with soot, the air tinged with something acrid that did not belong to wood. A deputy had found the place by accident, chasing a lost mule through the snow. What they uncovered was not livestock, but the remains of something far more unsettling. On the table sat a row of dresses, folded carefully, like someone had prepared for a journey. A blue calico lay on top, its hem singed by flame but still carrying the faint trace of lavender soap. Beside it, a bundle of leather boots with the toes worn thin, as if they had walked across half the country. The fire had not touched the ledger resting next to them. Dugan flipped it open with a gloved hand and read the first line in silence. Maria, 17, 65. The handwriting was neat, practiced, written as though it were ordinary to assign a dollar sign to a life. The marshal's throat tightened. He had seen killings, drunken brawls, theft, but this was different. This was method, and method frightened him more than violence ever had. A gust blew the door wider, scattering ash across the floorboards. In that gray cloud, for a fleeting second, Dugan thought he saw the outline of a girl's small hand pressed into the soot. He blinked, and it was gone. Behind him, Dr. Helena Morrison cleared her throat. She was younger than most doctors in town and one of the few women to practice medicine in the territory, which made her presence controversial. But Dugan trusted her more than anyone. She carried a satchel of vials and notebooks, and her eyes lingered on the folded dresses as though cataloging wounds invisible to the body. "They weren't burned here," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "This was storage. Someone tried to cover their tracks." Dugan shut the ledger. Then they failed. They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind claw at the cabin walls. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled, a sound that belonged to wilderness, not to this secret they had uncovered. When they stepped back into the snow, the saloon lights in the distance looked brighter than ever. The McKenna sisters were hosting another evening of music and laughter, the piano spilling cheerful notes into the night. People said Catherine had a gift for remembering every man's name, every woman's sorrow. They said Margaret baked bread that could cure homesickness in a single bite. But Dugan could not stop thinking about the ledger. About the lavender dress folded too neatly, as though waiting for a girl who would never return to wear it. He pulled his coat tighter, and in the dark, the glow of the sisters' saloon looked less like comfort and more like a lantern leading travelers into a trap. "God help us," he muttered. Dr. Morrison's reply was colder than the wind. "God won't be enough." The snow kept falling, covering their tracks as they walked back toward town, erasing, as it always did, the difference between the innocent and the guilty. The saloon glowed like a hearth in the middle of Harrison Avenue. Snow beat against the windows in streaks, but inside was all laughter and light. A fiddle sang above the hum of voices, and the air smelled of beef roast and cinnamon cider. Men loosened their coats, cheeks flushed from whiskey, and miners with pockets of gold dust forgot for a night how quickly fortunes vanished in the dirt. At the heart of it all stood Catherine McKenna, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, pouring rye with one hand while clasping a miner's shoulder with the other. She laughed at his joke before he even finished telling it, her teeth white, her eyes catching lamplight like polished glass. Catherine had a way of making men believe they mattered, that their story was hers to carry. She remembered names, mothers, ailments, details that slipped from other people's tongues but never from hers. Margaret worked in contrast. Where Catherine was flame, Margaret was the slow, steady glow. She baked, polished, and mended, humming under her breath as she moved through the crowd. Her bread was famous enough to draw men from neighboring camps. A single slice reminded the homesick of kitchens left behind in Ohio, Vermont, or Prussia. If Catherine opened doors, Margaret kept them warm. Together they were unstoppable, two women who had made civility out of chaos, saints of the silver boomtown. People praised them as proof that even in a lawless place, virtue could thrive. But virtue is a costume, and costumes are only convincing under light. At the corner table, a young girl sat with her carpetbag tucked against her knees. The lamp overhead softened her face, but anyone looking closely could see the rawness, fingers bitten by cold, hair tied with a frayed ribbon, eyes darting with the nervous rhythm of a stray bird. Catherine saw her instantly. New arrival, she whispered to Margaret as she passed the kitchen door. Margaret's response was a nod, nothing more. She set a fresh loaf on the counter and pressed her flour-dusted hands together as if in prayer. Catherine approached the girl with a practiced gentleness. She didn't sit right away, she leaned on the back of the chair, creating the illusion that she was passing by and happened to notice. "You look frozen through, darling. Where from?" "Chicago," the girl answered, voice barely audible over the fiddle. "Came on the line to Denver, then on a wagon north. Looking for work?" "Chicago," Catherine repeated warmly, as though it were a place she, too, remembered with fondness. "A brave journey. You must be hungry. Margaret's bread will put the color back in your cheeks." She waved to a boy, who hurried over with a steaming plate. The girl's hands trembled when she lifted the fork. Catherine watched the first bite with quiet satisfaction, then pulled out the chair across from her. Work isn't easy to come by in winter. But, she lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "We do know people. Good people. There's a family in Denver, respectable, looking for help. And a seamstress shop in Salt Lake that needs steady hands." The girl's eyes brightened, just enough to reveal the depth of her exhaustion. "Truly?" Catherine reached across the table and touched her hand. "Truly." From the bar, Margaret's eyes flickered over, reading the girl with a gaze sharper than her sister's warmth. She didn't smile. She never smiled during these first conversations. The fiddle stopped, replaced by piano, and the room swelled with song. The miners drank deeper, the air thickening with smoke and cheer. Only Marshal Dugan noticed the shift when Catherine's hand lingered on the girl's too long, the way a hawk's shadow lingers over a field. He had taken a seat near the back, quiet, his hat brim pulled low. He told himself he was only there for whiskey, but the ledger burned in his coat pocket like a live coal. The handwriting he'd read that morning matched the loops he now saw in Catherine's careful penmanship on the chalkboard menu behind the bar. Dr. Morrison arrived moments later, a scarf still dusted with snow. She joined Dugan without a word, setting her satchel down where no one could see. Together they watched. Margaret moved past them, carrying plates. For just an instant, her gaze locked with Morrison's. The doctor felt a chill, as though Margaret had seen her not as another patron, but as someone trespassing in a space where masks were supposed to hold. The piano grew louder, the crowd drunker, and Catherine's voice rose above the din, laughter, promises, the sound of trust being spun into a net. Dugan felt his hand twitch toward the ledger again. He wanted to slam it down on the table, to shout the numbers, the names. But he didn't. The town wasn't ready to hear. And Catherine, bright, beloved Catherine, would make him the villain before the crowd believed a word against her. So he sat, silent, while the girl finished her bread, her trust softening bite by bite. Margaret extinguished one of the lamps near the window, plunging the corner into shadow. To most, it was nothing. To Dugan, it felt like the first move in a game he hadn't yet learned the rules to. The storm broke the following morning, leaving the town glazed in ice so thick horses slipped in the street. Inside the marshal's office, the stove hissed, fighting back the cold. Dugan sat at his desk, ledger still unopened beside him, when the deputy dropped a packet of mail on the blotter. Most of it was dull: tax notices, handbills, a complaint about stolen chickens. But one envelope bore no return, only a smear of soot on the corner as if it had survived fire. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, the kind of script born in hiding. He slit it open with his knife. "My name is Emma Clark. If this reaches you, I beg you to listen. My sister and I trusted the women in Leadville. They gave us bread, warmth, a bed. They said there was work in San Francisco. They lied. I have seen what happens. I escaped only because the house caught fire and the smoke gave me cover. My sister, Anna, was not so lucky. She is still there, or worse. If you do nothing, more will follow us. The names in their ledger are the names of the dead, though their bodies still breathe. Please, for God's sake, stop them." Dugan read it twice, then a third time, feeling the words carve grooves into his chest. He set it down on the desk with shaking hands. Emma Clark. Anna Clark. He searched his memory and found them, faces pale and eager, passing through town 3 winters ago. Catherine had introduced them with such kindness that the whole bar toasted their arrival. Dr. Morrison entered just then, stamping snow from her boots. She took one look at his face and said, "What's happened?" Wordlessly, he handed her the letter. She read it once and pressed a hand against her mouth. "Dear Lord," she whispered. The stove popped, shooting sparks. Dugan's eyes burned. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but this was cruelty in the shape of hospitality. Every loaf of Margaret's bread, every tender question Catherine asked, had been a step toward betrayal. He wanted to storm the saloon, drag them out into the street. But the sisters weren't petty thieves or lone killers. They had admirers, allies, men with money and sway who would shield them if he moved without proof. To confront them too soon would mean ruin, for himself, for Emma, for every other girl whose name lingered in that ledger. "Then we need more than whispers," Morrison said firmly, folding the letter as if it were fragile skin. "We need witnesses. Evidence that can't be denied." Her words steadied him, but before he could answer, the door creaked. A figure stood in the threshold, wrapped in a shawl heavy with travel. Her hair was dark, matted from snow, her lips cracked. And her eyes, God help him, her eyes were alive with fury that did not belong to a ghost. "Anna Clark," she said, voice hoarse. The world seemed to lurch sideways. Emma's letter had spoken of her as lost, perhaps dead. Yet here she stood, thin as a shadow but undeniable. Dugan rose so fast his chair toppled. Morrison moved to her side, guiding her in gently. Anna clutched the shawl around her shoulders like armor, her hands trembling until Morrison pressed a cup of hot water into them. "I came back," she said after a long silence. "Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't keep silent." "You think you know what they do?" She shook her head, eyes hollow. "You don't." She told them then. In the flicker of the stove, her words came like stones dropped one by one: the night she and Emma were drugged, the wagon ride, the brothel in San Francisco's Barbary Coast. The men who bought names like coin, the doors that locked from the outside, the sickness that crept through the women like rot. She told them how she counted each day by the bruises fading on her skin, until the fire one night sent the house into chaos. Emma had run left, Anna right. They had not found each other again. By the time she finished, Morrison was scribbling notes, tears streaking her cheeks. Dugan stood frozen, jaw tight, his fists balled until his knuckles whitened. Anna leaned forward, her voice breaking into steel. You can't just keep ledgers and whispers. You have to drag them into the light. Every hour you wait, another girl eats their bread and believes their lies. The room seemed to close around them, the wind outside battering the shutters like fists. Dugan knew she was right. The letter had been a plea. Anna's presence was a reckoning. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not of the sisters, but of what would happen if he failed. Anna lifted her sleeve, revealing a scar that ran pale down her arm. This is what they left me. I won't let them do it again. Morrison's voice was quiet but certain, then you won't be fighting alone. The twist had come. The dead were not dead. The story was no longer suspicion, but testimony. And testimony carried fire. The town woke as it always did, boots crunching in ice, miners spitting dust into the gutter, shopkeepers sweeping their steps. But for Marshal Dugan, the morning felt as though the snow itself was holding its breath. The letter and Anna's testimony weighed in his coat pocket like stones. He sat in the office with Anna and Dr. Morrison, the three of them circling the fire like moths that had burned themselves already. Anna's shawl still clung to her shoulders, though she trembled less now. Her eyes were steady, but there was no softness left in them. You think the town will believe me? She asked suddenly. Dugan hesitated. They trust the McKennas. They've built their reputation on charity, on feeding the poor when no one else did. You'd be asking Leadville to admit it's been fooled for years. Anna's voice sharpened. Better their pride is wounded than another girl disappears. Morrison reached across, covering Anna's hand with hers. He doesn't doubt you. He doubts the town. She turned to Dugan. But we don't have the luxury of waiting for public opinion. We need action. You saw the ledger. Now you have her testimony. That's more than suspicion, that's a case. Dugan rubbed his temple. Cases fall apart when juries see saints instead of devils. Catherine will smile, Margaret will bake bread, and the jury will thank them for it. He leaned forward, eyes hard. I need more. Witnesses. Names tied to faces. Anna's jaw set. Then let me bring you more. The room went still. You've done enough, Dugan said firmly. No, Anna snapped. I haven't. Not while Emma's missing. Not while others are still trapped. You don't know them like I do. Catherine doesn't wait for girls to come. She hunts them, church gatherings, train stops, anywhere desperation smells strongest. If I walk in there, I'll see the signs before anyone else. Too dangerous, Morrison murmured. Too necessary, Anna countered. Dugan looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a victim but a weapon. Scarred, yes, but sharpened by survival. His gut twisted, was he protecting her, or denying her the only justice she had left? Before he could answer, a knock shook the door. The deputy entered, hat clutched in nervous hands. Marshal, there's a girl gone missing. Arrived from Kansas yesterday. Name's Clara. Folks say she was last seen near the McKenna place. Anna surged to her feet, the chair scraping loud across the floor. Her face drained of color, but her eyes blazed. You see? It doesn't stop. It never stops. Morrison rose as well. If she's already in their care, every hour matters. Dugan's chest tightened. The walls of the room seemed to close in, Anna demanding action, Morrison urging urgency, the deputy waiting for orders. Outside, the bells of the saloon chimed faintly through the cold, music, laughter, the sound of trust turning into a cage. He slammed his fist on the desk. Enough. The word cracked through the room. We move. But we do this clean. No mistakes. If Catherine slips through our fingers, she'll vanish into another town, and the ledger will keep growing. Anna stepped closer, her voice low, fierce. Then promise me one thing. When you walk into that saloon, don't treat them like angels. Don't let their smiles blind you. Look at them the way I saw them, the moment they locked the door. The marshal nodded, though his throat felt thick. Morrison gathered her satchel, checking the vials inside. If they drug that girl, I'll know. I'll prove it. The deputy tightened his grip on the rifle he carried. Dugan looked at them all, Anna, trembling but unbroken, Morrison, steady as a mountain, the deputy, young and afraid. And he thought of the crowd that would fill the saloon tonight, singing and laughing, blind to the horror behind the curtains. The stage was set, but the play had not yet turned violent. He pulled on his coat, the weight of the badge suddenly heavier than iron. Tonight, he said, voice like a vow, we end this. The saloon was at its loudest that night, every table full, the piano hammering out reels so fast the fiddler couldn't keep up. Catherine moved through the crowd like a queen disguised as a hostess, laughing, refilling glasses, leaning close enough to catch secrets. Margaret stood behind the bar, sleeves rolled, bread and roast filling plates faster than the drinkers could empty them. The sisters looked untouchable, bright pillars in the chaos of a mining town. But Anna saw the truth. She stood in the doorway, shawl drawn tight, her shoulder scar peeking white in the lamplight. The room's warmth pressed against her like a fever, but she did not step back. Morrison was beside her, pale but resolute, and behind them Dugan entered, hat low, his deputy at his side. No one noticed at first. To the crowd, they were just more patrons drawn by song and whiskey. Catherine noticed. Her eyes flickered across the room, catching Anna's face in the crowd. For an instant her smile faltered. Then it returned, brighter than before, sharper. She raised a glass toward Anna as if in greeting, as though they were old friends meeting after years apart. Anna walked forward, her step steady, until she stood before the bar. She set a bundle on the counter, a satchel worn thin from travel. She opened it and spilled its contents, photographs, scraps of letters, a charred ribbon from her sister's dress. The music faltered. Laughter thinned. Catherine tilted her head, the smile never slipping. My dear, what a journey you've had. You look half dead from the road. Anna's voice cut through the room. Half dead is better than the girls you sent west. She pressed the ribbon flat on the bar with trembling fingers. Emma. Clara. Maria. You know their names. You sold them like you'd sell whiskey or bread. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some men shifted uneasily, others frowned as though Anna had insulted the saints of the town. Catherine spread her hands wide, palms gleaming in lamplight. Such wild accusations. Trauma plays tricks on memory. This poor girl has suffered and you made sure of it, Anna snapped. Her voice broke, but she steadied it, louder this time, I watched you pour the tea. I woke in chains. I saw the ledger with my own name written inside. Do you deny it? For the first time, Margaret's hands stilled. Her knuckles whitened around the ladle she held. Catherine's eyes darted toward her sister, quick, almost imperceptible, but Anna caught it, and so did Dugan. The marshal stepped forward. He laid the ledger on the counter, the one found in the cabin, the ink smudged by fire. These pages match her testimony. And mine. You're not angels, Catherine. You're merchants of flesh. And tonight, the town hears it. The saloon went quiet, every breath suspended. Catherine's smile finally cracked. It broke not into fear, but into something harder, colder. You think this town wants your truth, Marshal? These men owe me their livelihoods. Their debts. Their wives' letters. Do you imagine they'll trade comfort for outrage? The silence was her stage. For a moment, Dugan feared she was right, that the crowd would shrug, laugh it off, go back to their whiskey. Then, from the far corner, a man stood. A miner, face scarred from rockfall, his hands black with dirt. "My sister came through here," he said, voice rough. "She trusted you." His words landed like stones. The room shifted. Other murmurs rose, questions, half-remembered faces, unease curdling into anger. Catherine's mask slipped entirely then. She turned sharply, signaling to a pair of men near the door. They stood, hands dropping to weapons. Anna was faster. She pulled the pistol from beneath her shawl and leveled it at Catherine. "No more," she said, voice raw. The room exploded. A shot rang out, shattering a lantern, spraying glass and oil across the counter. Flames licked up the wood. Shouts, screams, the crash of overturned chairs. Dugan's deputy fired back, dropping one of Catherine's men. Margaret lunged for the key to the back storeroom but never reached it. A bullet tore through her, sending her crumpling against the bread oven she'd tended for years. The smell of smoke and scorched dough filled the air. Catherine darted through the chaos, skirts whipping, her smile gone, her face a mask of rage. Anna fired, the bullet grazing her arm, but Catherine vanished into the crush of bodies and out a back door. Anna collapsed against the bar, her pistol clattering to the floor. Her chest heaved, blood seeping from a graze along her ribs. Morrison dragged her aside, pressing cloth to the wound. The saloon roared with fire and fury. Dugan stood over Margaret's body, face ashen, the ledger in his hand smeared with both ink and blood. For a long moment, no one moved. The flames climbed higher, the piano keys melting into silence. Then Anna spoke, voice hoarse but steady. "She's not gone. Not yet. And until she is, none of us are safe." By morning, the saloon was nothing but blackened timber and a skeleton of beams, its once polished bar reduced to a charred stump jutting from the ashes. Smoke curled upward into a pale sky, carrying with it the laughter and music that had fooled an entire town. Where there had been warmth and bread, there was nothing but ruin. Margaret McKenna lay buried in a shallow grave at the edge of the cemetery. Few came to watch the dirt cover her. Those who did kept their heads low, uncertain whether they were mourning a woman they had once trusted or the years of blindness she represented. Catherine was gone, her trail vanishing into the mountains, as if the snow itself conspired to hide her. Marshal Dugan stood by the wreckage with the ledger in his hand. The pages, smoke-stained and brittle, fluttered in the wind. He had thought exposure would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like staring into an abyss that would never be filled. The names written there, Maria, Clara, Emma, remained unanswered prayers, even as justice began to stir. Dr. Morrison gathered what record survived, Anna's testimony, her own medical notes, the fragments of letters. She sent them east, to lawmakers and reformers, knowing they would read them not as history but as warning. Evidence, she called it, though in truth it was grief bound in paper. Anna healed slowly. The scar along her ribs ached when she breathed, but the deeper wounds were harder. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, she woke choking on memories of smoke, chains, the weight of strangers' hands. Yet she refused to vanish. She spoke in the courthouse, her words trembling at first, then steady, like iron hammered into shape. She told the truth in rooms where men shifted uncomfortably, where women lowered their eyes but listened harder. Each time she spoke, the silence afterward was heavier, harder to ignore. The town began to change, though unevenly. A new committee of women demanded stricter oversight of boarding houses. Preachers warned of wolves in angels' clothing. Some men left flowers at the site of the saloon, others spat when they passed. Progress never comes all at once, it arrives like thaw in the Rockies, melting snow slow enough that you hardly see it, until suddenly the river is roaring again. Years later, children in Leadville played in the shadow of a ruined foundation, daring one another to creep across the scorched boards. They whispered about the sisters as if they were ghosts, half believing the stories, half afraid Catherine might step from the trees, smiling, with bread in her hands. Anna never stopped searching for Emma. She traveled as far as San Francisco, as far as Salt Lake, following whispers, showing photographs. She never found her, but she never let the trail go cold. And Dugan, his hair silvering, his badge heavy, carried the ledger everywhere. Not as proof, not as evidence, but as reminder. The Book of Names was not just a record of crimes. It was a weight he had sworn never to set down. One evening, years later, he stood by the charred foundation with Anna. The wind was sharp, the sky streaked with red dusk. She asked him quietly, "Do you think Catherine's still out there?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the blackened wood, at the ash that still clung stubbornly in cracks. Then he closed the ledger, pressing it tight against his chest. "Evil doesn't vanish," he said at last. "It waits. It changes its face. All we can do is remember the names." The wind carried his words away, scattering them like ash across the mountains. And in the fading light, it seemed for a moment that the snow itself was whispering back the names, one by one. E2.